بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من المؤمنين رجال صدقوا ما عاهدوا الله عليه فمنهم من قضى نحبه ومنهم من ينتظر وما بدلوا تبديلا. نوروا مجالسكم بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
If we were to condense the message of Ashura into one sentence, how would we describe it? There is no description which matches the description of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein himself regarding his mission. He says, إِنِّي لَمْ أَخْرُجْ أَشِرًا وَلَا بَطِرًا وَلَا ظَالِمًا وَلَا مُفْسِدًا. I did not rise in order to spread deviation and corruption. I did not rise for political benefit or political gain. إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْإِصْلَاحِ في أمة جدي محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Why did I stand? Why did I revolt? Why did I resist? In order to seek reform, revolution, and change in the ummah, in the nation of my grandfather. What has been changed, what has been altered, what has been fabricated for decades now, I want to change and bring back the pure Islam, the morals and the ethics which existed during the time of my grandfather. So it is a message of renaissance. It is a message of revolution. It is a message of reform and a message of change. Now, how did Imam Hussein alayhi salam seek reform? How did he seek change? What went wrong within a matter of decades that all of a sudden the Muslims found themselves in a dilemma and a tragedy? That the grandson of Rasulullah has to be killed. Him and his 72 companions and his family members and the granddaughters of Rasulullah taken from one city to another. What happened in the span of only a few decades after the death of Rasulullah? If we look at the conflict on the day of Ashura, we say, number one, the conflict was between two sides. One side represented the truth, which sounded unpopular. And the other side represented falsehood, which was disguised by the truth, which was sugar-coated and made to look popular and attractive. This teaches us a lesson that falsehood can be sugar-coated and it can be made to be deceiving and look attractive. Banu Umayyah were not the first people to take falsehood and disguise it with what seemed to be the truth, nor were they the last people. Who came before them? centuries before them and decades before them. We have examples in history. Look at Fir'aun. When Fir'aun sought to kill Musa and his followers, what did he tell his people? إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُبَدِّلَ دِينَكُمْ. I am afraid that he will change your deen, your ways, your culture, your religion that you are so used to. I'm afraid that he is going to change. He is going to fabricate and deviate. And I am afraid, he continues to say, that I am afraid that he is going to spread deviation and corruption among you. In the same way that Fir'aun sought to disguise his cause, which was falsehood, by truth, that this person, your enemy, who in reality is good, he is false, he is evil. And when the Fir'aun himself, he was evil, he sought to make his plan seem attractive. That happened on the day of Ashura as well. Banu Umayyah were successful. They were successful in deceiving people. They were successful in manipulating the message of Islam to their own benefit. And we have so many examples. It was not out of coincidence that there was anti-Ahlul Bayt sentiment. Muawiyah, in order to eradicate the memory of Ahlul Bayt, he did not begin a few days or a few years before the incident of Ashura. He began much earlier. He began to spread poison among the people. He began to make the truth look like it was false and false like it was true. The propaganda that Muawiyah poisoned the minds of the Muslims with, all of this contributed to what happened on the day of Ashura. Imagine this ironic paradox, that the people who fought against Imam Hussein on the day of Ashura, they stood and they established their congregational prayers. And when the camp of Imam Hussein sought to establish their prayers, they said, no, your prayers do not count. And when they took the head of Imam Hussein from Karbala to Kufa to Damascus, they would gather around the head and they would drink wine. And Yazid himself, who they refer to as the commander of the believers, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he would take his metal rod and he would strike the lips and the teeth of Imam Hussein, and he would drink wine and read poetry. Isn't this ironic? They kill the man whose grandfather they follow. Many years later, people would come to Abdullah ibn Abbas, the cousin of Imam Hussein, who was a scholar. They came to him one day and they said, Ya ibn Abbas, what is the kafara, the expiation, or the penalty for a person who observes the state of ihram? A person who performs the umrah or the hajj has to observe the state of ihram. And when you are in the state of ihram, there are things which are forbidden upon you. One of them, for instance, is profanity and swearing. And if a person does use profanity or swears, he must pay an expiation. One thing which is undesirable, or one thing which is not allowed, is killing animals. You cannot kill animals. You cannot, for instance, shave or cut your hair. So a muhrim must observe a number of things. One of the things is that he cannot kill an animal, no matter how big or no matter how small. So they come to Abdullah ibn Abbas. Ya ibn Abbas, what is the expiation, the kafara, for a person who kills a ba'udha, a small bug? He looks to them, he says, how ironic. A few years ago, you killed the grandson of Rasulullah with nothing. With guilt-free, with a guilt-free conscience. And now you're asking me what's the penalty for killing a small bug? So imagine the irony which existed. To them, Hussein was an insurgent. He was a rebel. And until a few centuries ago, there were people who said that Hussein rebelled against the legitimate leadership and he was killed by the sword of his grandfather. Meaning he deserved what he got. Yes, read their works. He stood up against Amir al-Mu'mineen Yazid ibn Muawiyah and he was killed by the sword of his own grandfather, Ibn Taymiyyah. So imagine the irony that exists. This is because they were able to take falsehood and sugarcoat it, make it look attractive as if it was the truth. And Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan was an expert at this. Look at his identity. They refer to Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan as Katibul Wahi, the scribe of the Quran, the man who recorded the Quran. When the Prophet was in Mecca, he was a mushrik, he did not accept Islam. The Prophet went to Medina, he was not among those who migrated to Medina. The Prophet came back and he took over Medina. And under the sword, when they saw the tip of the sword, him and his father accepted Islam. And when they accepted Islam, the Prophet expelled them from Medina. اذهبوا فأنتم الطلقاء. So when did Muawiyah ever have the chance to sit down and write the Quran? If he was not with the Prophet in Mecca in the beginning, and then not in Medina, and then when the Prophet came back, he expelled him. When did he all of a sudden become the scribe of the Quran? And what proves the mentality of Banu Umayyah, that they did not believe in Islam, was Yazid himself when he saw the head of Hussein. لَعِبَتْ هَاشِمُ بِالْمُلْكِ. Hashim, Banu Hashim, they played around with authority as if it belonged to them. فَلَا خَبَرٌ جَاء وَلَا وَحْيٌ نَزَلْ. There was no khabar and there was no wahi, no revelation. Meaning that there was their cousin Muhammad received no revelation. This was Yazid. And then his father is what? Katibul Wahi, the scribe. They say that in the last year of the life of the Prophet, he sat down and he wrote down the Quran. He was the scribe of the Quran. So he's the scribe of the Quran, but a few years later in the Battle of Siffin, what does he do to the same Quran which he wrote down with his own two hands? He rips through it with a spear and he places it on top of a spear. And this is how he was able to manipulate people. So falsehood can be sugar-coated and it can be made to look like the truth. That's why Imam Ali alayhi salam, during the Battle of Siffin, when he saw this sight, that they were disrespecting the Quran, he said, we cannot fight them anymore. When Imam Ali alayhi salam decided upon the ceasefire, the fanatics in his own army, what did they do? They said, Ya Ali, Muawiyah is a disbeliever, he is a kafir. And since you have agreed to a ceasefire, then you, wal-'iyadu billah, you are also a kafir. And that now you have no rights in order to judge in the arbitration. Stand up, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Stand up please and come forward. Please stand up and come forward as much as you can. الثاني على حب الحسن والحسين صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. الثالث على حب فاطمة الزهراء بأعلى أصواتكم. When the Imam saw them fighting with the Qur'ans on the spears, and when he accepted to the arbitration, they said, Ya Ali, you have no more authority. Authority belongs. Listen to the following statement, what they said. Listen to the following statement. They said, authority belongs only to Allah. And they quoted the Qur'an. That authority belongs only to Allah. Meaning that you have no authority anymore. Muawiyah has no authority anymore. And that authority is exclusive to God. What does Amir al-Mu'mineen reply to them? He says a short but sweet sentence, which is full of meaning. He said, كَلِمَةُ حَقٍّ يُرَادُ بِهَا بَاطِلٌ. كَلِمَةُ حَقٍّ, this is truth. There is no authority except for Allah. The word itself, the phrase of itself, it represents truth. It is the essence of truth. There is no authority except the authority of Allah. But he said, كَلِمَةُ حَقٍّ يُرَادُ بِهَا بَاطِلٌ. It is true in itself, but its implication is void. You are trying to take away the legitimacy of my khilafah by saying that authority is to Allah. Authority is to Allah, but what you are trying to imply is false. So what is true in itself may be wrapped and sugar-coated with falsehood. Or what is false in itself may be wrapped and sugar-coated with the truth. And this is how Muawiyah and Abu Sufyan and Yazid and Banu Umayyah, this is how they created enmity towards Ahlul Bayt in the hearts of people. Ali ibn Abi Talib prays. People would ask this question, that really he prays? We heard that he does not pray. Because he was able to inject his poison in the minds of people. And we have so many examples. One contemporary example. How many people do you know who are fasting tomorrow on the day of Ashura? Came across people who are fasting. Do you know that this was a sunnah, a practice, which first of all is batil. It is void. And it was introduced by Banu Umayyah and continued through Banu Umayyah and Banu Abbas. Why would they fast on the day of Ashura? Because they wanted to celebrate their victory over Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But Sayyid, we have a hadith. Bukhari narrates from Abdullah ibn Umar and Aisha that the Prophet used to narrate on the day of Ashura. What do they say? What's the justification for fasting on the day of Ashura? They say that the Prophet, and this is a fabrication by the way, they say that the Prophet, when he migrated to Medina, when he entered Medina, he saw the Jews fasting on the day of Ashura. So he asked them, he said, what are you doing? They said, we are fasting. He said, why are you fasting? They said that it is the day of atonement, the day that Allah freed Banu Israel from Fir'aun, the day that Musa split the ocean in half and we were able to escape Egypt and head towards Palestine. And it is a day of atonement. And Allah has required that we fast in thanks for atonement and for allowing us to escape from Muawiyah and his forces. Now this is the interesting part. The Prophet looks to them. He said, I am more familiar with the laws of Musa than you. And since I am more familiar, then we're going to start fasting this one. So the Prophet needs a Jewish man to tell him that it is recommended to fast. The Prophet didn't know himself. In the same way that when the Prophet came down from the mountain after hearing the words of Jibreel, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Yes? When he came down from the mountain and he wrapped himself, he shrouded himself. Ya ayyuhal muddathir qum fa'anzir. In another verse, Ya ayyuhal muzammil. And muddathir is the one who covered himself because the Prophet felt physical, he felt a heaviness when he received the message of Islam. He could not figure out what was going on. So Khadija called her Christian cousin, Waraqat ibn Nawfal. And he had to come and tell the Prophet that now you are a prophet. He had to be informed by a Christian that he was a prophet. And he had to be informed of the sunnah of Musa by the Jews. Okay, so this is number one. He made it wajib or highly recommended for the Muslims to fast on the day of Ashura. And then we have ahadith that say that the day of Ashura was the day that Adam descended to the earth, and that Ibrahim was saved from the fire, and that Musa escaped with Banu Israel, and this, and it is such a blessed day that you should fast. First of all, when the Prophet saw the Jews of Medina fasting, how did he know that they were fasting? Fasting is the only act of worship which does not have any physical activity. Fasting means that you do not eat, that you do not drink, that you do not lie, that you do not fornicate. Everything is a do not, it's not a do. So how could they physically show that they were fasting? The Prophet could have no way of telling that they were fasting, number one. Number two, if it was the Day of Atonement, which falls in the Jewish month of Tishri, which is in September and October. When the Prophet entered, it was in the month of July. Muharram in that year was in the month of July. And their Day of Atonement was in September or October. The Jews had their own calendar. They weren't following the calendar of the Muslims. So it made no sense for them to fast on the day of Ashura. So there was no fasting on the day of Ashura. But what happened? Banu Umayyah, after the event of Ashura, they began to fast out of celebration for their victory over Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And then, because it was endorsed by Fulan ibn Fulan and Fulana ibn Fulana, then that's it. It has the seal of approval, and that's it, we take it as sunnah. And now there are millions of people across the world who fast on an invalid basis. None of it is true. None of it is true. All of it is fabrications. None of what they narrate happened on the day of Ashura happened, except for the death of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, and that's it. Falsehood, but it's made to look like the truth. And there are so many examples. This is how Banu Umayyah, they took advantage of the minds of the people. Look at how Banu Umayyah and Banu al-Abbas attacked the personality of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Maybe we're familiar, and the problem is that these misconceptions don't only exist within non-followers of Ahlul Bayt, even in the followers of Ahlul Bayt. Even with the followers of Ahlul Bayt. There are some people who suggest that Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, the second Imam, wrongfully they believe this, that he was a habitual divorcer, that he would marry and divorce and marry and divorce and marry and divorce. And what is their proof? That Imam Ali alayhi salam said to the people, imagine, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he stands in front of the people. He says, "Oh people, I apologize on behalf of my son. I am embarrassed from my son Al-Hasan, and do not marry your daughters to my son Al-Hasan, for he is a habitual divorcer." A man stands up, he says, "Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, who are you to say this? We are honored to give our daughters to Al-Hasan. You cannot prevent us from giving our daughters to Hasan, and we will keep giving, and we will keep giving, even if he divorces them." So Amir al-Mu'mineen has a change of heart. He says, "May Allah bless you." And he blesses the tribe which the man came from. And he said, "If it was in my hands, I would give the keys to the paradise to this tribe." Why? Because they want to marry and divorce their daughters to my son Al-Hasan. When did this happen? It wasn't Banu Umayyah, it was Banu al-Abbas. And by the way, Banu al-Abbas were more treacherous than Banu Umayyah. They had more enmity and animosity to Banu Hashim than Banu Umayyah did themselves. When did this happen? It is said that when the Muslim community was fed up with Banu Umayyah, what did they do? They tried to reinstall the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. So who were the supporters of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt? They had their relatives, they had distant companions. One of the people who sought to install himself as Khalifa was the great-grandson of Imam al-Hasan, al-Nafs al-Zakiyya, Muhammad al-Nafs al-Zakiyya. Because he was a grandson, he had support. So who came to his support? Banu al-Abbas. Now who are Banu al-Abbas? For those of you who don't know. Banu al-Abbas are the descendants of al-Abbas, who was the uncle of the Prophet. Al-Abbas, he is the uncle of the Prophet. He is the brother of Abu Talib. He is the brother of Abdullah, the father of the Prophet. Banu al-Abbas are the descendants. So they are the cousins of whom? Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They were closer to Ahlul Bayt than Banu Umayyah were to Ahlul Bayt. But they were more treacherous. They had more hatred and animosity and greed. So he found his supporters, and his supporters, initially, they wanted to install him as Khalifa. But what happened? When they saw it became serious, they installed themselves in Khilafah. Their first one was called Abu al-Abbas al-Saffah. Abu al-Abbas, the butcher. Because he butchered all of Banu Umayyah. He killed them. He gathered them after he installed himself as Khalifa. And their revolution, imagine this. The revolution of Banu al-Abbas took place on the day of Ashura inside the masjid, and they were all wearing black. People thought that they were commemorating the death of Imam Hussein. They did not know that they had other plans in mind. So they gathered the sentiment and the emotions of the people. They overthrew Banu Umayyah. They installed themselves. Abu al-Abbas al-Saffah, he butchered Banu Umayyah one by one. One person from Banu Umayyah survived. He went to Egypt and they installed a puppet Khilafah there. And that's how it went from North Africa to Spain. That's how the lineage of Banu Umayyah continued all the way till Spain. Now what happened? Abu al-Abbas al-Saffah was the first Khalifa. After him comes whom? Al-Mansur al-Abbasi. Al-Mansur al-Abbasi, he needs a legitimate document. He needs an excuse to continue the Khilafah of Banu al-Abbas. He cannot find an excuse for himself, so he tries to destabilize the reputation of the grandsons of Ali ibn Abi Talib. So the first thing that he said when attacking Muhammad al-Nafs al-Zakiyya, the great-grandson of Imam al-Hasan, he says, look at his grandfather al-Hasan, and this is where the propaganda began. Look, he couldn't even fight against Muawiyah. And Muawiyah offered him clothes, and he offered him money, and he came to a ceasefire. And then look at Al-Hasan. During the time of his father, he began to what? He began to marry habitually. And he spent his entire life marrying and divorcing. That's all he did. And the reputation for Imam al-Hasan being a habitual divorcer did not begin with Banu Umayyah. It began with Banu al-Abbas. And this propaganda spread even to the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Number one, how was Imam al-Hasan a habitual divorcer? Come to the books of history. The ones who say that he is a habitual divorcer, they said that he had 70 wives. Married and divorced 70 wives. Another one says 90 wives. Another one says 250 wives. One of them, he says, I don't know. And I've heard someone spread a rumor that he had 300 wives. And he writes it in his history book. Now let's study the history of Imam al-Hasan. They say that he became thirsty for marriage and divorce when his father went to Kufa. When did Imam Ali go to Kufa? In the year 37 after Hijrah. And when did Imam al-Hasan die, pass away? In the year 51 after Hijrah. So from the year 37 to the year 51 after Hijrah, 14 years. Within 14 years, how many wives could he have married and divorced? The same historians say that he had 3 wives. From the time that he went to Kufa till the time that he passed away, he had 3 wives. He maintained 3 wives. So how many wives could he marry and divorce at one time? 1. Some of them would say that he married 4 wives in one sitting, and he divorced 4 wives in one sitting, which cannot be true because he had 3 wives. How many more wives can he marry? He can only marry 1 at a time, correct? Now if he marries 1 at a time, he will have 4 wives. Follow me in this. If he marries 1 at a time, he will have 4 wives. If he divorces the wife, since she is still in her iddah in 3 months, because the 3 months which follows a divorce, the iddah, the waiting period, the woman is still considered the wife of the man. She has to observe the iddah, she has to stay in the home of the man in case he changes his mind and he wants to take her back, or for whatever reason, she has to stay in his home. So for 3 months after the divorce, she is still considered his wife. So even after he divorces her, it is still as if he had 4 wives. Now if the day after 3 months he marries another wife, and then he divorces her again, the same process repeats. If we calculate this, we can say that at most, if Imam al-Hasan had nothing to do but marry and divorce, at most he could have only married 3 wives a year. And 3 times 14 is what? I didn't calculate this part. How much is 3 times 14? It is definitely less than 70, correct? If he had not, how much? 42. At most, which in itself is batil. This was not the akhlaq of Imam al-Hasan. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, do not marry my son al-Hasan for he is a habitual divorcer. Why would Imam Ali alayhi salam stand in front of the people without reprimanding his son in private first? So he would reprimand Imam al-Hasan in front of the people before telling him in secret. And if he did reprimand and he did not listen to him, Imam al-Hasan was a disobedient person. See, Muawiyah, Banu Umayyah, Banu al-Abbas, they could not attack the Imams of Ahl al-Bayt for their actions. They had to try to destroy their reputation. They could not refute the fact that the Prophet said, Al-Hasan wal-Husayn imaman qama aw qa'ada, that Al-Hasan wal-Husayn are imams, whether they stand or whether they sit. So they had to try to attribute these things to them. Abu Talib, who said that he was a kafir? It began during the time of Banu Umayyah, but it was promoted during the time of Banu al-Abbas. Why? Because their father, their grandfather al-Abbas, he was the brother of Abu Talib, but from a different mother. This is what caused their enmity and their hatred. They could not stand that he was from a different mother. So they started this propaganda, and they would take what in itself was false, and they would wrap it. They would sugarcoat it with truth. And this is how Muawiyah was able to instigate against Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. So number 1, we know that truth can be made to look like falsehood. And we know that falsehood can be made to look like truth. This is number 1. Number 2, the Imam says, when speaking of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, that the Imam gave up everything that he had لِيَسْتَنْقِذَ عِبَادَكَ مِنَ الْجَهَالَةِ وَحِيرَةِ الضَّلَالَةِ, in order to save your people from ignorance, from going astray, and from being lost, and from confusion. The reason why we see Muslims today praising the likes of Muawiyah and Yazid is simply because they are confused on the identity. Who is Yazid ibn Muawiyah? Who is Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan? Those same people, they are confused. They have no idea. Imam Hussein alayhi salam spilled his blood in order to wake us up, in order to seek the truth. لِيَسْتَنْقِذَ عِبَادَكَ مِنَ الْجَهَالَةِ وَحِيرَةِ الضَّلَالَةِ. Confusion. Had they known the identity of Muawiyah, had they known the identity of Yazid ibn Muawiyah, they would not have blindly supported them. And to this we go to the Quran. We refer to the Quran. In one instance in Surah Al-Asra, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to the Prophet. And I mentioned this yesterday and I will elaborate more. That the Prophet saw a recurring dream that monkeys would come up on his pulpit and they would descend. And they would ascend and they would descend. And this dream kept bothering the Prophet. So the Prophet turns to his companions. He asks them about the interpretation of this dream. At that point, Jibreel descends to the Prophet. Ya Rasulullah, the dream that you saw is true and is going to come true. And in the words of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they are whom? The monkeys. In the dream of the prophets, Banu Umayyah. وَالشَّجَرَ الْمَلْعُونَ. The cursed tree. The cursed tree are the ones who occupy the minbar of Rasulullah. And they came one after another. 83 years they lasted. For 83 years they occupied the minbar. And for 83 years it was a sunnah instigated and introduced by Muawiyah to curse whom? Every Friday, the one who is performing the salah, the one who is leading the salah, it is incumbent upon him to curse Muhammad, Ali, Fatima, Hassan and Hussein. Allahu Akbar. For 83 years. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Except when one of them comes and rules for a short period, 2 years, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he says no more cursing. And because he did not show his enmity towards Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they got rid of him, they replaced him. For 2 years he ruled, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. All of them were nawasib. All of them, they hated Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. People are confused. Until today, people are confused about the identity of the Sahaba. Who were the Sahaba? What were their backgrounds? People are even confused about the identity of Ahlul Bayt. Many of our young people, and when I speak about the identity, I speak about what knowing the Imam, who the Imam is, not just his name. His name, some of our Shia youth do not even know their name. They know the names of the boys from One Direction, but they don't know the names of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. This is a calamity. This is a calamity. This is where you see Islam going into a downfall, diving headfirst. And this is why Imam Hussein alayhi salam, this is why he spilled his blood, to awaken the people from confusion, from ignorance. See who these people are. It was not that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, after years of the Sahaba and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, there was no enmity between them, no animosity. They're perfect. Ali loved them and they loved Ali. And nobody cursed Ali and Ali did not curse anybody. And the wars were just simple conflicts. All of a sudden the grandson of the Prophet is dead, him and his family. Why did Imam Hussein spill his blood? So that we can ask these questions. Who were the perpetrators behind Ashura? And not only that, where did they seek assistance from? Where did they seek inspiration from? And what caused them to commit this crime against Imam Hussein and his family? So this is number one. Truth against falsehood. Number two, he spilled his blood to awaken us from our state of ignorance. And number three, there are Muslims who say the following. They say that when it comes to the early conflicts which took place in Islam, we should not mention these conflicts. And some of them are well-natured, well-intentioned people. They say that we shouldn't focus on conflicts that take place. These sow the seeds of animosity and conflict and contradiction in Islam. And what do they use as a pretext for their arguments? The following verse in the Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. تِلْكَ أُمَّةٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَلَكُمْ مَا كَسَبْتُمْ وَلَا تُسْأَلُونَ عَمَّا كَانُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. That is a nation which has passed. It will be rewarded accordingly or punished accordingly, and you shall also be rewarded and punished accordingly. And you shall not be asked about the fate of the people that came before you. Now what is the pretext of this verse? People used to come to the Prophet after the advent of Islam. Ya Rasulullah, what happens to the fate of our ancestors who did not accept Islam? Who did not have the honor of accepting the message of Islam? Are they in heaven or are they in hell? People kept bothering Rasulullah with these questions. So he answers to them, تِلْكَ أُمَّةٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ. That is a nation which has passed. Don't worry about them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will judge them accordingly. If they spread corruption and deviation and they were evil to their families and their neighbors and themselves, then God will naturally punish them. But if they were good, if they were benevolent, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shall also reward them. This verse is not telling us that we cannot criticize people who spent their lives fighting against the message of Islam and the message of Ahlul Bayt. In fact, the Quran in many places encourages us to stand with the truth against falsehood. يَوْمَ نَدْعُ كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. On that day we will resurrect each person with their imam. Who is your imam? If you find yourself right now in the battle of Karbala, before the battle of Karbala, in the battle of Jamal, in the battle of Siffin, in the battle of Nahrawan, in the battle of Ashura, where are you going to stand? On which side are you going to stand? Will you stand on the side of Yazid and Muawiyah? Or are you going to stand on the other side or say, no, I don't want to get involved? Do you think saying, I don't want to get involved is going to benefit you? Staying quiet to oppression is the same as providing the environment for oppression to take place and thrive and prosper. Staying quiet to injustices is as if you have committed the injustice yourself. When we read Ziyarat Ashura and we curse the perpetrators who fought against Imam Hussein alayhi salam, what do we say? وَلَعَنَ اللَّهُ أُمَّةً سَمِعَتْ بِذَلِكَ فَرَضِيَتْ بِهِ. May God curse the ones who heard about it and they were okay with it. May God curse the ones who did not do anything about it, who did not come to the aid of Imam Hussein alayhi salam when they were able to do so. Those who abandoned truth. يَوْمَ نَدْعُ كُلَّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. On that day, we will resurrect each person with their imam, with their leader. If you don't make a choice right now, you will have to make a choice in the hereafter. Align yourself with your imam in this world before you will be placed in a situation where you have no more choices. On the Day of Judgment, there's no more choice. You can't say, I choose this or I choose that. You have already made the choice in this world, and you have to live by your choices and your decisions. So number one is truth and falsehood. Number two is the ignorance which Imam Hussein alayhi salam sought to extinguish. Number three is that we confirm in this life, before the next life, that we stand for the values of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And number four, we say, what does Ashura represent? Ashura represents everything. Islam would not be Islam if there was no Ashura. People who would establish Friday prayers, drunk. People who would establish Friday prayers, not during noon, but they would wait until Maghrib time, and they would pray Friday prayer, with Maghrib and Isha all at once. People who would build wineries on top of the Kaaba. Al-Walid ibn Yazid, one of the final Khulafa of Banu Umayyah, he built his winery on top of the Kaaba. So when he goes to Mecca, he can enjoy his wine while he's performing the tawaf. The same Al-Walid ibn Yazid, one day he is reading the Quran. And he comes across the following verse in Surah Ibrahim. There is a verse in Surah Ibrahim which threatens those who spread injustice and oppression. He takes the Quran and he takes it as a personal insult to himself. So he places the Quran on top of a mantle, and what does he do? He begins to shoot arrows at it like a target. واستفتحوا وخاب كل جبار عنيد من ورائه جهنم ويسقى من ماء صديد. They prayed, the people of Musa, they prayed that the Jabbar, the tyrants shall be brought down, and Allah answered their prayers. وَاسْتَفْتَحُوا وَخَابَ كُلُّ جَبَّارٍ عَنِيدٍ. Every jabbar, every tyrant, every dictator shall surely be brought down. This is a promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He took it as a personal offense. That the Quran is threatening him. That you will surely, he knows he's a dictator and a tyrant. The Quran is threatening him. So he places it on a mantle and he begins to shoot arrows. And no, he begins to recite poetry. أتوعدني بجبار عنيد فها أنا ذا جبار عنيد إذا ما جئت ربك يوم حشر فقل يا ربي مزقني الوليد. Do you blame me? Do you blame me for being a tyrant? Yes, surely I am a tyrant. If you, O Quran, stand in front of your Lord on the day of judgment, tell him it was Al-Walid bin Yazid who tore me into pieces. This was their Islam. And this is Amir al-Mu'mineen, the monkey who sits on the pulpit of Rasulullah. And this is why Imam Hussein alayhi salam stood. And this is why Imam Hussein is the fuel of our revolutionary spirit. And this is why we remember Imam Hussein alayhi salam year after year, in order to add fuel to the revolutionary spirit which exists inside us. Revolution, it can be internal, it can be external. Imam Hussein's was an external revolution. He fought against a tyrant. For us, it may not necessarily be an external revolution. Sometimes the revolution takes place inside of you. It is in order to awaken us to ask yourself, if I am faced with a choice whether to do what is right or what is convenient, what will I do? Imam Hussein did not choose the path of convenience. He chose the path of what was right. And he stood up for the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And the way that we identify ourselves with the values of Imam Hussein alayhi salam is by remembering the calamity of Imam Hussein. There are some that suggest that what we understand or what Imam Hussein alayhi salam contributed to us is mere thoughts and intellect. Philosophies, ideas, motives. We should not cry for Imam Hussein. We should benefit from the philosophy which he provided for us. No, la wallah. Only an ignorant person says something like this. We remember his tragedies and we cry for him because the prophets, before our own prophet, the prophets, they themselves weep for him. And the Imams of Ahl al-Bayt themselves, they weep for him. And Imam al-Sadiq says, Allahumma arham tilka as-sarkhata allati kanat lana. May Allah have mercy on the one who screams for our cause. Not the crying, not the weeping, not the as-sarkha. Do you understand Arabic? As-sarkha is the shout or the shriek that comes from the bottom of your lungs. Allahumma arham tilka as-sarkhata allati kanat lana. Our eighth Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa Rada, when remembering the tragedies of his grandfather, he says, Inna yawm al-Husayn aqraha jufunana. The day of Ashura, we wept so much that our eyelids have been damaged for it. Yes, we do cry. We do cry and we do identify ourselves. He is the fuel that fuels our revolutionary spirits. And he has been placed for us to remember and mourn year after year, and we will continue to mourn him as his followers year after year. For his mourning is eternal. It does not exist in one time or in one space or in one country. Now you go all around the world and you find people mourning for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. In all of the continents, in North America, in South America, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, everyone cries and screams for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Everyone beats their chests to the chants of Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written this upon us. Beginning with Adam, continuing with Ibrahim, continuing with our Prophet, and continuing all the way until our Imam al-Hujjah reappears. وَلَأَنْدُبَنَّكَ صَبَاحًا وَمَسَاءً وَلَأَبْكِيَنَّ عَلَيْكَ بَدَلَ الدُّمُوعِ دَمًا. I will cry for you and I will weep and I will lament morning after morning and night after night. And I will shed tears of blood for you, Ya Hussein, my grandfather. Ibrahim alayhi salam, what does he ask of his Lord? I want to continue the story. Yesterday I didn't continue the story of Ibrahim. Ibrahim, when he stands in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he says, "Oh Allah, I wish that you had granted me the privilege and the honor to sacrifice my son Ismail with my own hands, so that I can stand in the day of judgment with that burning desire and passion in my heart." The burning desire which a father experiences, and maybe no father has experienced killing his own son. We have fathers who hold the bodies of their sons in their hands after they have been killed, murdered, or after they die. But have you ever seen a father which mercilessly kills his own son? And Ibrahim would have done so willingly, not mercilessly. He would have done so to follow the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya Allah, I want this pain in my heart, so you can reward me for this pain on the day of judgment. He tells him, I will replace this pain and this distress with another distress. Since you love Muhammad more than yourself, and since you love the sons of Muhammad more than your own sons, since this is your burning desire, since this is your burning passion, and since the sons of Muhammad will be killed in spite of his will, then I have replaced your distress and your sacrifice with the sacrifice of the sons of Muhammad. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ, that we replace the sacrifice of Ismail with a greater sacrifice, not the sheep. The sheep is not a great sacrifice. Allah is saying, according to the hadith of our 8th Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rada, that he is replacing the sacrifice of Ismail with the sacrifice of whom? Hussein. And that this burning desire, this burning mourning, this lamentation will exist in the hearts of the prophets and all of the Imams and the followers of the Imams. This is how we seek our proximity to Allah. If Ibrahim seeks proximity to Allah by weeping for Hussein, then who are we not to seek proximity to Allah for weeping for Imam Hussein alayhi salam? What do we have in this world that we can offer Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment? Your prayers? Do you think that all of our prayers are counted and all of our fasting is counted? La wallah. I know that not all of my prayers may be perfect. And Imam Sadiq turns to one of his companions. He says, how embarrassing is it? One of his companions, not a random person. One of his companions who claimed that he knew all the laws of prayer. After praying in front of him, he said, how embarrassing is it that you or one of our followers spend 60 or 70 years of praying and that he does not offer one prayer properly? And this was the companion of the Imam. Do you think our prayers are proper? Our prayers are accepted? Our fasting is accepted? I'll tell you from myself, la wallah. My prayers won't be anything when I stand in front of Allah. My fasting will not be anything. I don't look forward to my prayers and my fasting. One thing I do look forward to is my grief for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. This is what I have hopes in. This is how I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to honor me. جاءك الناس للحساب ملوكا وأنا قد أتيت صفر اليدين لا صلاتي ولا صيامي يجدي كل زادي إليك حب الحسين. People will come to you, O Allah, on the day of judgments like kings. They will have handfuls, their prayers and their fasting and their charity. I will come empty-handed. I will have nothing to offer you. All I have to offer, Ya Allah, is my love for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.